Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. This season, we are talking with leaders inside organizations focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking with them about best practices and proven tools for positive change. We are also sharing vignettes from our new book, Allyship in Action, to help leaders take real, tangible action on DEI right away. This work is important because all humans need to feel seen, heard, and belonging in the workplace. Hi, allies. The subject this week is accountability. So if you've been following along, we've done a little mini series on our new book, Allyship in Action, and happy to give you a preview of the content because there's 10 practices we find that work at work as well as at home, and all sorts of conversations we want to have really in all spheres of our lives. So the missing ingredient in the allyship conversation, as I've been studying this for the last 7+ years, has been action. So that's why we intentionally put action in the title. And the action step we're going to talk about today, the practice that I think most people really struggle with, is accountability. And not just accountability for others, because that's what we like to focus on. Other people need to be held accountable. No, accountability for ourselves. Because we need to take a hard look in the mirror sometimes and think about, what am I doing? How am I participating in this challenge, in this issue? How am I contributing to the problems? Because we all live in a problematically racist, sexist, homophobic, fatphobic, ability supported society where a lot of the norms are of the majority group, right? And that's usually white, straight men that are able-bodied and cisgender and straight. So when you think about how the systems have been created, who have they been created for? And how are they working for everyone else, right? And so by not taking action, by not holding myself and others accountable, I'm complicit with the very system that holds other people back. And I think just process that for a minute. That was really deeply painful for me because I'm like, wait a second. I didn't create all of this. I didn't do anything with redlining or gerrymandering or educational privilege or, contribute to where the wealth gap is, for example, amongst races. But I am benefiting from being a white woman in a society where that gives me a leg up from folks of color. I'm able-bodied. That gives me a leg up. That gives me an advantage, if you will. It's probably more inclusive to folks with a disability. I certainly am straight and cisgender. That gives me an advantage over the LGBTQ plus community. I don't have to come out all the time and out myself and feel othered. Right. So just some examples of the types of privileges that we can bring to this conversation and how that's really a chance to be an ally. I look at the privilege lens as this is how we can be helpful. Right. So what I'd encourage you to do is reflect on how are you modeling the behaviors you want to see from others, right? We talked about that. That's been a big theme through this episode series. So I really want you to reflect on that. How are you modeling what you expect of others? What behaviors are important to you? What values are important to you? For example, my family just participated in a values exercise where we came up with 4 key values that we're going to mutually hold each other accountable to. It becomes really easy to have call-in conversations so that we can be better, okay? And that's where the courage piece we talked about earlier really overlaps with this one. So 1, take a look in the mirror. How are you modeling the behaviors you expect? What are the values that are important to you and those around you? And how could you maybe have a conversation about that? I'd also encourage you to take a look at your network. Most of us have affinity bias and surround ourselves with people like us. So who do you spend time with? Right? Your phone, your email, your calendar, just think about, are they people like you? Hold yourself accountable to diversifying your network. And I promise you'll get better. I mean, there is an innate response, like a very huge impact with diversifying your network. You learn more. It's much more interesting. Conversations are so much more interesting, and you grow. And as human beings, it's one of our most primal needs to feel belonging, but also to grow, to be learning and learning new things. But it can feel uncomfortable too. And then I'd invite you to call folks in. And this is something Loretta J. Ross has a fantastic TED Talk on calling people in. Just simply Google it. You can find it really easily. It's just maybe a shade over 10 minutes long. Wait till the end, though. Don't shortcut this one because it's good at the end. She has a really good story that brings the tools to light. But she says, rather than call people out, and we've talked about microaggressions in previous episodes and the importance of really having a conversation with folks. This is an opportunity to be an ally, keep that radar up. Loretta, I love the way she frames it as this is rather than calling somebody out, I'm going to call you in, call on you, in fact, to be better. And I love that language because it's showing I care about you, but I'm also going to challenge you, and I'm not going to let these things, these microaggressions, these, awful othering experiences happen on my watch. And another tool we really like that we talk about in the book is the Flip It to Test It model by Kristen Pressner. And she has a TED Talk on the subject as well. Really great content to follow. But essentially, if you're unsure if something happened is problematic, not inclusive, and really unsure, just flip it to test it. Right? So if this person was the opposite gender identity, or racial identity, or a different ethnicity, would it still make sense? Would this still happen? Right? And because a lot of people say, oh, I was just saying something. It's not a big deal. People love to really brush these things off. Or I'm a good person. Right? I would never say something harmful or racist. Well, yeah, I'd like to think most of us think we're good people. Most of us are goodish people and make mistakes. I call it the bumble and the stumble of allyship. So rarely are you doing this perfectly, myself included. I will make mistakes. I make mistakes on this podcast and I don't edit them out. I actually, use it as a learning opportunity for myself and to others. And first few times I did that, it was deeply painful and embarrassing and vulnerable. But I found that's an important behavior for me to model. So if I were to say something like, oops, I didn't mean it that way, right? Or, oh, let me take it back. Let me say it a different way. I think that's really powerful to folks around us, that we don't expect perfection and that we can be real and inclusive at the same time. So specifically, when you're holding yourself accountable and others accountable around you, I encourage you to use some of these talk tracks. One I've shared before, I used to think that too is really powerful. If somebody says or does something non-inclusive, like, oh my gosh, I've made that mistake too, right? Especially if you actually have, right? Here's what shifted for me. I love that language. What's shifting for you? What has shifted for you? How could you let people in on your story, your journey? I simply just asking people, what do you mean when you said that? Right? I had someone use the term ghetto recently in front of me, and I just said, hey, that's not a term we use anymore. What do you mean when you said that? And he's like, oh, well, I just meant it was an area that, wasn't very, wealthy and there's poverty and da-da-da-da-da. But the problem is when people say a word like ghetto, you have a very specific image of what that looks like. And it's usually pretty racialized. So especially as a white person, not using that term, an opportunity to be better. And that's just an example. As a non-event, we went on in the conversation, but I didn't want him to know that that was okay to say around folks, especially if he said that around folks of color. That could be problematic and offensive. My perception is, let's do more of this. Let's do less of that. I really like that framing for feedback. What could we do differently next time? A really great way to unpack and debrief. One of my personal faves, talk track I love, by my allies, Brad Johnson and Dave Smith, who wrote the book, The Good Guys. Highly recommend it. Allies. It's a wonderful tool, especially for white men, written by white men. They love to just say, ouch. If somebody says something, it's oh gosh, cringeworthy, everyone's thinking it. Just say it. Woof. I don't think we probably want to say it that way. Let's think about how we could be better, right? And so you want to adopt the language to fit the scene, assess the level of trust you have with folks. You probably wouldn't use some extreme language with somebody you don't know that well. And again, you can always unpack this privately. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. Usually 5 minutes is fine, maybe 20 minutes if it's going to meander. But that's your job as an ally, to really frame the conversation so that it lands well And more importantly, it informs future behavior and guides people to be better and inclusive. So if you liked this episode, if you're enjoying this series, buy the book, Allyship in Action, 10 Practices to Live Inclusively. We also have a companion activity workbook that you can use at home and at work with a lot of the activities that we've explored. So you can buy both of those on Amazon. If you're looking for 10 or more copies, drop us a note at nextpivotpoint.com. We can absolutely help you with a bulk order and give you a nice discount to do that. So we'll be finishing up with a couple more practices. Thanks for paying attention to the series. We appreciate you, allies. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.